Hey everybody, this is Hercules Pedix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the Hercules Pedix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Dan O'Neill's Comics and Stories, Volume 2, Number 1 and 2. These are from 1975. Volume 1 of Dan O'Neill's Comics and Stories included three issues. They all came out in 1971. And he stopped the comic, did some other stuff, and then 4 years later he came back with these two issues. And they're different than the first three issues from Volume 1 in that those first three issues pretty much featured his Odd Bodkins character, who Dan O'Neill created way back in I think 64 or something. It was syndicated to a few kind of alternative papers. And but these are very different, and there's barely any Odd Bodkins, and they're really good. I've been reading Dan O'Neill comics for years, little stories and undergrounds here and there, but getting a nice big chunk of his stuff, I realize I really like his stuff, and I definitely want to get more. I have a feeling that first volume is going to be hard to find because it has a lot of his Disney parody type stuff, and I think that stuff can never be reprinted because Disney will... well, I don't even know if Dan O'Neill's alive, but if he is, they'll sue his ass into the stratosphere. So here's number 1 of Volume 2. I love this, how he totally duplicates the Dell logo. Well, it's hell, but it's dead on. I mean, before computers and stuff, that must have been pretty hard to do. As you can see, this is Dan O'Neill's style. It's kind of a very loose, but really nice cartoony style. Like just capturing some of the great cartooning of the 30s and the 40s or even the 20s, like strip artists. It's very classic, very good stuff. I like these colors too. We have a little one panel gag here. And we start off with South of the Slot with Cub Calloway, ace reporter. Tonight's episode, there's a hot time in the old town tonight. Cub Calloway is going to take up the majority of these two issues. There's a lot of stories about him. I think I've never seen this character before, except in this comic. So one night we see Cub Calloway asleep, and all of a sudden he's wide awake on a street corner. This kind of weird, mysterious, cool old car comes up and says, "Get in the car. This is not a dream." The driver's very mysterious looking, almost looks supernatural. He takes him to a bar. He says, "In there, the master awaits." And who should it be but Satan himself? And Cub Calloway seems pretty unfazed by this. He just orders a drink and just starts chatting with the devil. And Satan says that I summoned you here to interview me. And he basically wants to talk about how there's no free will. So this comic kind of turns into a kind of humorous take on the whole, age-old debate between free will or choice, freedom of choice. And it's very clever. He's a really good writer. I can't read the whole thing to you, but almost every panel, the word plays great. The dialogue is really fun. Very fun and clever. So it's revealed throughout this interview that Satan is kind of, he's burnt out. He's got an ennui. He's just bored, for millions of years, never having a challenge. So Cub asks him, he says, all those times you have contests with humans, you always cheat, don't you? And he's like, yeah, of course, I'm the devil. He's like, what if you tried not doing that? Maybe it would be the first good brawl you've had in eons if you actually just played fair. And Satan's all kind of excited by the idea. So he agrees not to use any, just supernatural shenanigans. And basically he challenges Cub Calloway. We'll find out what he challenges them to in a second. They get in a plane for some reason, and they fly to Nevada. Satan leads him into this cave, and he shows him the Mother Nugget. Now, this is actually the mythical philosopher's stone. If you touch any rock to it, it turns to gold as well. So he says, you can have this. You'll be, set for life. But you have to carry this out of the cave. If you can do that, you win it. That's the challenge. I did want to mention that almost see how it's pretty much just strips, 4 strips a page? Each strip kind of has a punchline. So I assume maybe these were syndicated little strips that tell this continuous story. It's pretty seamless, though, the way it flows. There's no recaps like in some of the comic strips. So it reads really nicely as a, full comic. But each little strip is kind of enjoyable unto itself. Kind of an interesting trick, or that he pulls that off. And once again, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, is that his art is just very classic, fun cartooning, perfect for humorous stories. I also love the way he draws Cub Calloway with his big hook nose. So Cub Calloway grabs the nugget, and as he's trying to leave the cave, millions of roaches show up, mosquitoes and rats, and they all attack him. He basically has to drop the nugget and run. And so he loses the bet. But he tells Satan, he says, "You cheated." And Satan says, "I didn't create those roaches and mosquitoes and rats. God created them." And he basically uses this as to prove that there's no free will. He says, "I controlled all of your choices, so you had no choice. Free will can't exist without choice. You're just a kid." And Cub says, "I'm a conditioned response." He seems kind of crestfallen to realize that the devil is right. But then he turns the tables on him, and he says, "Do you mind if I make a personal observation? I think you're a knee-jerk liberal who hates his father." And it's really pissed off Satan. And he says, "You dare to insult me with that Freudian garbage?" And Cub says, "Free will made me do it." And then all of a sudden, he's transported back to his bed. He kind of got the better of the devil. Next, we have News of the World. And this is kind of a character. It's Dan O'Neill. It's like his avatar, this cute little guy who's his mouthpiece, basically. And so these comics, he'll basically talk about society and politics. It's probably Dan O'Neill's opinions, and he uses this little guy. Maybe he looked just like that. I don't know. I love the son character he has, who kind of talks to the guy and also comments on things he's doing. And he's talking about being in Belfast. We see a concentration camp here. I guess the English locked up the Irish people they didn't like. So it's just a little kind of a tour of what Belfast is like. The troubles were still going on. I love this weird ghost in the sky who basically represents British imperialism. And Dan O'Neill obviously does not like this. And he starts talking to the ghost and kind of giving him shit. He says, "I saw you in Vietnam." Just love the way he draws him with all the lines. Dan is a really good cartoonist. I know it looks all kind of simple and dashed off, but I think he's got the core talent where even when he does a little squiggle, it's a good squiggle. He knows what he's doing. And so the comic ends with him talking to the son. Just more politics, basically. Next, we have the Penny Ante Republican, kind of trying to duplicate some old-timey newspaper heading. And this is a Wounded Knee, 1973, We see Nixon with a bunch of arrows in his nose. And this is him just talking about the Native American situation in America. He seems like he has a bunch of comics about that. He talks about the Irish situation. He basically talks about a lot of oppressed people and their struggles, but in a very humorous way. It's not pedantic at all. It's totally, I know it sounds weird, but it's lighthearted, even though the subject isn't. Next, we have Cosmic Question Time. And this one's very odd. It starts off with this panel. Do we agree that cannibalism is immoral? Yes, no. And I don't know if Dan O'Day really believes this, or he's kind of being a devil's advocate, but basically he starts talking about how, like, cannibalism, almost like this pro-cannibal argument. I love some of these panels here. Here's some more, like, specters in the sky. He does these so well. It's like something from Fantasia, from Night on Bald Mountain. Really nice last page. So it looks really quick. But man, I love the way he has this church just by doing all these lines. Next, we have Hawksilla and his friends. So Hawksilla's this little Native American kid, and he's taking a walk one day, and he sees his friend, Mastankala, the rabbit. Mastankala says, down there, Hawksilla, down there in Wounded Knee, that's where the Wasiku killed your people. And Hawksilla hears fighting, and they're like, what's going on down there? So the rabbit says, come on, we'll go ask Mato. He'll know. Mato's a bear. So this whole thing reads like some old Native American myth, with the spirit animals and the talking animals. They ask the Mato about Wounded Knee. We get kind of a mini history lesson here really quick. And the bear talks about how the Wasiku didn't keep their promises. They broke the treaty and forced the Sioux off their land. I really like this. I wish there was a whole children's book of these stories. And the bear says, you must learn who your brothers and sisters are and who among your people are creatures of Iktomi. Iktomi basically is like this spider god. So an eagle shows up, Wanbli, and Wanbli says, here, get on my back. I'll show you, teach you about the Iktomi and his creatures. Here's Iktomi here. And basically he says, your people who are weakened by alcohol and drugs, they are Iktomi's creatures. They basically lost the way. This panel, even though it's way simpler, totally reminds me of like Winsor McKay, Little Nemo. And eventually the kid says, okay, I just want to go home to my people in Wounded Knee. And he did. And then we see this last kind of like commentary page by O'Neill, like a little epilogue. I love this drawing with, once again, just using these lines, just slashing across different weight. And it totally makes this amazing drawing of Iktomi. Now we have more South of the Slot with Cub Calloway. Tonight's episode, Holiday for Cynics. Man, I really like how the art is really tight in these. Maybe because it's so small, he's got to fit a lot in. But there's some really sharp drawing in this one. I really like this. So one day, Cub is walking down an alley, and this guy pulls a gun on him. And this guy says, shake my hand, or I'll blow a hole through you. So he shakes his hand, And all of a sudden, his mind is blown. It's almost like he goes on some crazy psychedelic journey. Love that panel. Love this panel. Where it's almost like he's ejected from this bizarre staircase or whatever it is into the universe. We see him falling and he lands in a garbage can. And then he sees this guy, this the shady figure. And he says, where in a horror's dream are we? And he says, you're in the future. Look at this. Speaking of Winsor McKay, this looks like it could be a background in Little Nemo. That's some good architecture. And I guess in this future, they discovered that, they're running out of food. So they just started eating other people. And it does seem like they're all eating, non-Anglo-Saxon type people. I guess because there's so many of them, Chinese meat is very prevalent. Has a lot of protein. We see this meat grinder here. So they're in a diner, and he orders a poor boy sandwich, which in this future is probably really has a poor boy in it. And he orders some tomato juice. This guy at the end of the counter, this big fat guy, he says, tomato juice? What are you, some kind of fruit? Can't you drink plasma like the rest of us? On the menu, we see Eskimo burger, Filipino burger. And this guy basically starts getting aggressive, like he's going to kick his ass. So the shadowy figure hands Cub his gun, and he shoots the guy, kills him. The waitress comes out and says, you know the rules. We get all the meat. We claim it. Anyone killed in our restaurant, we get to keep it. So, of course, Cub Calloway's disgusted by this future. He's like, I don't like this future. This is terrible. And I love these panels here of this horse. This guy on a horse grabs Cub and flies away with him. And he basically throws Cub, back into the world. And we see Cub in an alley. And a cop just thinks he's a bum. Next, we have Sodden News. This is another very odd thing where, does Dan O'Neill really believe this stuff? Basically, it's this screed against health food. How actually, it's not good for the world, eating vegetarian, eating healthy. And I can't really explain it to you. It's kooky. But once again, I don't know if he really believes this or if he's being a devil's advocate just to be silly, Very loose cartoony in this one, as you can see. This is an interesting, this is the kind of thinking that goes behind this comic. A short quiz. General Motors was forced to sell its seatbelts by law. But by doing so, they made a bundle because now they got to add seatbelts into the price and sell us the seatbelts. So it's almost like they say that General Motors secretly loved Ralph Nader for making them do that. Summary. Ecology is a front to aid the construction of the welfare state, which in future generations will be food for the more intelligent life forms. Eat your brown rice, dummies. Very odd. I do like this drawing here. God, those diagonal lines. So interesting looking. Next, we have the true story of Jesse James. He took it with him. And like it says, this is it's not the true story of Jesse James. He's claiming it is, but it's not. Basically, this story talks about how Jesse James really wasn't killed by, what's that guy's name? Bobby Ford, that coward Bobby Ford. And he actually lived on to a ripe old age. But of course, everyone believed that he was dead. I like how they say they had a song ready. They already had one ready. It's that, famous old song. Yeah, he lived to be 1950. He lived to 1951, and he's still hanging out with his brother Frank James and Bob Dalton. And then I guess all these old timers uh, decide to have like a kind of reunion, and they went up to the Badlands with 10 cases of whiskeys and a hooker. And I love this last panel of all these old men, like they're like 108. They don't know what to do with the hooker. And one of them is eventually says, "Why did you have to bring her anyway? She's ruining our fun." Next, we have O'Neill in the dock. And this is interesting because this is O'Neill talking about at the time, it was concurrently happening. He's talking about his trial with Disney, his lawsuit with Disney, I should say. And I don't know if this is true, but according to him, Disney actually charged him with aggravated assault on Mickey Mouse, a cartoon character. I don't know if that was actually part of the trial. Very witty, very funny. Dan is a pretty smart guy when he's not making up crazy theories about health food and cannibalism. So he's just talking about the whole lawsuit, the history of what was behind it. He claims that all of this Disney parroting was really just like a kind of like socialist propaganda he was doing. He draws all these Disney characters, but they all have these little rectangles over them, these kind of censored blocks. There's kind of like the Disney dragon. But he claims that it has a chilling effect. Basically, everyone's afraid of parody now. Because, he brings up a great point. To be honest, I can't remember if it's in this comic or in things I've read before. But he basically says, like, fuck you, Disney. You've been shoving this character down our throats since we were born. Mickey Mouse pajamas, Mickey Mouse peanut butter, cartoons on TV constantly, shows on TV. It's like you've been shoving this character into our consciousness. We should have the right to parody it and make fun of it. It's part of our consciousness, the universal national consciousness. We should be able to talk about it and comment on it and parody it, which is, to me, sounds totally sane. It's just like, yeah, you shoved yourself into the discourse, the national discourse, so now we can talk about you. But apparently it didn't work that way. Disney won the trial and was really stuck it to these air pirates, these hippie cartoonists who were pretty poor guys. They were left with huge $100,000, I don't know, even more tabs that they couldn't pay. Very interesting little bit of autobio there. Here we have an ad for Comics and Comics. I believe that's Dan O'Neill. And we also have an ad in the back cover, but it's basically we get some more Dan O'Neill cartooning. I think this is interesting. Dan O'Neill and his mom and his dad wrote a book together to teach people how to draw. I just thought that was kind of cute. What a weird thing to, like as a grown man, write a book with your parents. Here's number 2. Well, volume 2, number 2. What a weird, crazy cover. I don't know what the hell this thing is, but it's pretty nightmarish. I love this, all these circles, concentric circles, and the deep blue of this cover. That's just a really eye-catching cover. We have another little gag. And now we have another true life adventure of Cub Calloway. And as you notice, it's very different. So I'm pretty sure that first issue, those were strips. So he's packing a lot of shit on the page. Now he's just making stories about Cub for comics, for this comic. So he's being pretty loose. He's just like, I don't gotta have like 17 panels on a page anymore. This is kind of just a goofy gag about, he's telling a story about a man eating spaghetti, how we wrote an article about it. And just like the man bites dog joke, it turns out that it's man eating spaghetti. And this guy orders spaghetti one day and it eats him. Kind of dopey. I do like how the police finally stopped it with a lawnmower. ground up the pasta. Next, we have this story. It's about the Holy Mugger. The Holy Mugger is this mysterious figure who popped up one night, and he's been terrorizing the city, but not really terrorizing it. He mugs people, beats them up, conks them in the head, but then he leaves $1,000 with them. So, of course, people are like just walking around the streets hoping to get mugged by this guy. I love the way he drives this police car here. And here he is. And we were just talking about his Disney parodying. This kind of looks like the Phantom Blot from Mickey Mouse. And really, I love the way he draws this little shadowy, silhouette figure. So he's keeps doing this. And the cops are trying to, find out who he is. And now we see Cub playing poker with the cops. He gets an announcement. He hears over the police radio. The cops don't do anything. They're into their poker game. So Cub says, I gotta get to work. See, like I was saying, how loose this is. But it's just, he's such a good cartoonist. It doesn't matter. It's just great cartooning. He goes down to Hamburger Mary's, this bar owned by this transvestite. And back then, I don't know if she was a transvestite or a trans person, whatever, or drag queen. But that's his kind of his source of information. She kind of gives him a clue. She says, I don't know everything about this Holy Mugger, but 5-to-1 odds he's going to be on this certain corner tonight. Cub Calloway goes to that corner for a stakeout, and I almost said the Phantom Blot. The Holy Mugger shows up. I love the body language of this Holy Mugger. So, for the first time, though, someone fights back. Cub fights back. And he starts to really trounce the Holy Mugger. And he ties him up. And the Holy Mugger says, am I under arrest? He's like, hell no, I'm a reporter. I'm going to force you to give me an interview, though. And I didn't mention this earlier, but for some reason, the Holy Mugger only assaults middle-class people. And so that's the first question he asks him. He's like, I don't get it. And then it turns out to be this elaborate kind of, I don't know, like almost economic conspiracy tale where he tells Cub Calloway, he says, the poor are too poor to pay taxes, and we rich are too rich to pay taxes. So the only people paying taxes are the middle class. But they're starting to get uppity, this middle class. They realize how powerful they are. So I'm basically trying to make them dependent. It's a very silly plan. I mean, he'd have to do this like 1,000 times a day to actually affect the middle class. But he wants to make the middle class basically not work hard anymore. And then just basically take handouts. It sounds like Dan O'Neill really doesn't like the idea of the nanny state or the welfare state. And then that'll lead to a chaotic society with no ecology, no taxes, and nothing except profit. Cub Calloway says feudalism with computers, huh? So he's just like the super rich guy, and that's his whole thing. He frees himself from his bonds and conks Cub Calloway in the head. His editor doesn't believe him at all. He's like, lay off the sauce, Cub. And that's the end. Now we have another Cub Calloway story. He's hanging out with his hippie friend who's a health food fanatic. And he makes him a cup of coffee. There's no sugar because this hippie believes that sugar is evil and bad. He gives him honey, though. And Cub Calloway says, honey, you mean bee poop? And basically just talks about how honey is made and how it's really just bee poop. The history and future of the U.S. and other stories, as told to Cub Calloway. This is just a kind of a little vignette, basically trying to show how people don't listen to each other. People just want to talk about what they want to talk about, even in the middle of a conversation. We see Cub talking to the Dan O'Neill kind of avatar. And Cub Collar was talking about serious stuff, like how China is taking over the world, all the socio-political factors that are going to come to pass because of that. Russia and America, we kind of lost Asia, and he projects into the future. Pretty soon, America's going to be owned by China. Meanwhile, Dan O'Neill is just talking about a sausage commercial he heard on the radio and talking about these delicious sausages and how he's been eating them. And it looks like they're having this conversation for page after page, but neither of them are listening to each other. Kind of silly, but kind of a true observation. Some people actually do this. Even though they don't do it this blatantly, they kind of pretend to be listening, but they're thinking about what they want to say, I like this. The Armchair Revolutionary presents The Do-It-Yourself Conspiracy, starring the unknown glitch. And this is kind of interesting, almost prescient, because this comic came out in 1975, and he's talking about how he mentions 40% of the GNP is hard goods, food, cars, shoes, 60% is the gathering, storage, retrieval, and marketing of information. The past 20 years, we've kind of know this, that intelligence is very lucrative. Gathering information on people, all the data and stuff. But this is 1975. He's also talking about computers. There were barely any computer operators back then. But he even calls them hackers. I guess back then hackers weren't doing shenanigans necessarily. They were just guys who operated a computer. If you were a computer programmer, they called you a hacker. So he's going to tell us about glitches. So glitches are basically like viruses. So this guy at MIT made a glitch, put it in the system of this major corporation. This glitch kept screwing things up and then going to sleep, so they couldn't find it. Just like a virus. It's really hard to get rid of. And basically, they would have had to shut down their whole computer system to get rid of this glitch. It would have cost maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to reboot the computer and put the memory back in. So basically, Dan O'Neill is exhorting us, like, hey, if you really want to fuck with the system, they need computer programmers. There's not enough kids graduating with computer degrees. Get a job in a corporation as a computer programmer and make these glitches that'll cost them all this money. If you really want to take a stab at Texaco and AT&T, but this is a very interesting idea and kind of smart, actually. Next, we have some more Cub. And Cub is just telling this weird story about how there was this guy in jail called Protein Man. Looks like Superman, right? And Cub Calloway interviewed him. And he tells Cub that he used to be an advertising marketing type guy for granola, for health food. And he was very successful, but things went badly, and his hair started falling out. He realized that he needed protein quick. So he started just chomping cows, like taking big bites out of cows, and that's how they caught him. There was this rash of cattle mutilations, and they realized it was him. Very odd. This one's Abraham Lincoln Comics. I like this logo. He's duplicating the $5 bill. And this is interesting because all the dialogue of this comic is the captions. All it is a speech that Lincoln gave in 1865. I'm going to read some of this to you, or maybe most of it to you, because this is so scarily prescient. Even 1975, it had already come true, but it's way more true now. Which, what is it? We're 50 years away from this, right? Yeah, 50 years gone. Abraham Lincoln said, "I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me." I love this weird monster representing, capitalism. "And this causes me to tremble for the safety of our country. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption in high places will follow." And look at this, the Statue of Liberty with a for rent sign. I mean, even in our grandfather's lifetime, even since the beginning of America, it's like That's how it's been. You can just lobbyists, It's legalized bribery. It's basically, if you got a lot of money, you can make the government do what you want. Oh, and then he goes on to say, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working on the prejudices of the people. So we see these kind of KKK guys harassing this black guy. And, just like if you read about the history of the unions, history of the labor struggles, the rich bosses would constantly pit the immigrants, the blacks, the whites, all against each other so that they wouldn't unite and fight the real enemy, them, the ones keeping them down. So, man, Lincoln, smart guy. And then he finally says, this will happen until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. And then Dan O'Neill shows up and blows his head off, and he says, hey, sorry about that, but the management didn't like these words, this speech you've been given. Just stick to your backwoods country stories, like the people like. This is getting a little too real. You're hitting the nail on the head a little too much for our liking. Love this comic. This is really good stuff. In the beginning, God created the banana. This is so funny, I think, this comic. It's so clever. It's the book of Genesis, the whole creation myth, the Christian creation myth. But it all starts in this, supposedly because God just wanted to make a banana. And then he realized, it's not good for the banana to be alone, so I'll make a banana tree. But that's going to need someplace to take root. So he created the earth, and he created the sky and rain to feed the tree. The banana was still lonely. So he created birds. And the banana was still lonely. So God gave the banana sex. And the banana went bananas and produced more and more bananas. So pretty soon, there was too many bananas. And now God was like, I got to do something to take care of the bananas. So he creates monkeys. And he commands them to eat eat back the bananas. Of course, the monkeys go at this with gusto. And then until there's barely any bananas left. So now God has to create man to eat the monkeys to stop them from eating all the bananas. But unfortunately, unlike the monkeys, man lacks enthusiasm. So he's just kind of like, okay, boss, if you want me to eat monkeys, I'll see what I can do. And so they half-heartedly try to eat some monkeys. But, and it's kind of weird. God looked down and said, no smile. So God created a smile. There's that little sun character that we keep seeing in Dan O'Neill comics. It's kind of like the Greek chorus. And then God created a woman to make man smile, I guess. But you know how things are between the sexes. This created trouble for man. And so man, creates war. Basically to like show these women. I'll show them. War created horror. Horror created humor. And a smile was born. So I guess when the idea that humor couldn't exist without horror to inspire it could be true. I guess people laugh to get over, to make light of things that they can't bear to think about. And then God was so disgusted by all this war and horror, he kind of went back to the cold nothing. He retreated back into his weird universal dimension, just kind of fed up with Earth. So eventually, mankind kind of prospered using our smile. Monkeys ended up in zoos. The bananas were captured by the United Fruit Company. And this whole thing was just for this last gag, I think. And God in the cold nothing was asked, are you disappointed? And God said, yes, I have no bananas. But I love the idea of this, that the whole God created everything just to make the banana happy. Here's O'Neill's Revenge, or Dusting the Footprints Off My Back. Just another weird little Dan O'Neill character strip, talking about how you should never kill your enemies because you don't want them to die. In fact, you should protect them because you don't want them to die, so you can't, you'll never be able to cause them suffering if they die. And this is a way to do it. I don't know if this is true, but he goes to a drugstore, gets poison oak extract. I don't know why they would sell that. And he puts it in a squirt gun, and he basically squirts it on all of his enemies, like toilets, any place they're going to touch. And of course, it ruins their life. Once again, really quick, fast cartooning, but just looks great to me. Almost like Harvey Kurtzman stuff, you know? Now we're back in Ireland, and we're back at a concentration camp. Dan O'Neill's kind of checking it out. He says Long Kesh, that's the name of this camp. 1,000 men concentrate on the Irish question. It's kind of a clever pun there. Cub Calloway, he's talking to this guy. The guy says, yeah, it's the damnedest thing. The president was giving a speech or something. He came out of the entrance, and some guy shot him in the head. The bullet went right in his right ear and passed out his left ear. And then the president smiled and got in his car. So this is a gag. Gerald Ford was president at the time, and he was kind of universally made fun of for being a dummy, for being brainless. So that's why this joke makes sense, I guess, if you remember Gerald Ford. I need some water, guys. Excuse me. And then we get these little strips on the bottom of Odd Bodkins. So Odd Bodkins finally shows up in the very last pages of the last issue. And these are just kind of fun gags. I don't know if these are older because they're drawn in a very different style. Definitely more time was put into these, it looks like. Then again, it could be just because they're shrunk. It makes it look tighter. And then we have another Cub Calloway gag strip. And then we have another Odd Bodkins little strip running on the bottom. And then we have 3 Odd Bodkins strips to finish off the issue. They're all, little gag strips. But, from Dan O'Neill's point of view, like, they're kind of philosophical. They're pretty funny. I really like this cartooning. It looks really fun. And actually, I wanted to mention this one. Odd Bodkins and his buddy are depressed, so they're like, should we jump over this cliff? And, we probably shouldn't. It'll be fatal. And his friend says, how do we survive this depression then? How about spite? Think of all the turkeys we disappointed because we didn't jump. I feel better already. And I was just reading that to you because when I was a really depressed youngster, I never once contemplated suicide. And the main reason is that I didn't think things would ever get better. I was dumb. I was a dumb weirdo. But I didn't want to give fate the satisfaction. I personified fate as this big fat bastard who loved every time I was unhappy. And I knew if I killed myself, he would get the last laugh and be like, I did it. I succeed. I win. So the main thing, I think, keeping me from wanting to ever kill myself was that. It was the spite of like, I'm not going to give that motherfucker the satisfaction. So that strip really spoke to me there. And we have those 2 same ads again. And that's it for Dan O'Neill's Comics and Stories, 1975. Hope you guys like looking at these. I definitely want to get those first 3. I have a feeling they're going to be very expensive if I can even find them, because it's got the Disney-esque covers, and I'm sure they were kind of pulled from shelves or whatever after the trial. But hope you guys like this, and I hope to see you next time here at the Hercules Penix Academy of Comic Book Studies.